Okay, welcome to the second video in this series covering the fundamentals of 3D modeling for games. In this video, we are going to be covering the modeling of the dumpster. This is going to be a garbage dumpster, and essentially what we're trying to do here is introduce the process of modeling from reference images. And so instead of modeling just from what we perceive the object to look like from a single image, we'll actually be bringing those images into the software itself and using them as a far more proper reference from which to model. And so the mesh that we're modeling, the dumpster itself, looks a little bit something like this. Now this image in particular is going to be also important, since the only images that we have to work from are going to be silhouette images of the dumpster. And this image here will allow us to see things that are not present in this silhouette. And so we're going to need to reference this image down the road, but this is essentially the mesh that we're going to be making here. So the first thing that I'm going to do, now that I have Maya open, is hit spacebar here to go into my my 4 views, and I've already kind of turned off the grid here in some of these views. If I turn this back on, you'll see it in a more default state here. Now the 2 images that I'm providing for this assignment are the front view and the side view of the dumpster. And so let's tackle the front view first. I'm just going to maximize that viewport by again hitting spacebar with my cursor over it until we can see that viewport here full screen. Now in order to load our image plane into the scene, I'm going to head up to the view section, and then down at the bottom I'm going to go to image plane and import image. From here I'll navigate on my computer to where I've stored the images. This is in School, Sheridan, Fundamentals for 3D Modeling in week 4, where I've got the dumpster silhouette _F. So I'll load this in, and you can see what Maya does right away is creates a piece of geometry, the right length and width of the dumpster image, and places it here in the center of our world. Now, the default here for the placement of this image is not ideal. The dumpster is actually half embedded in the ground, and you can see that whoever put these images together, based off this little hole that we can see in the dumpster here, this is actually the gap between the 2 lids, that the image actually isn't centered inside of the image, or the image of the dumpster is not centered within the actual JPEG. And so this too we're going to have to shift around in order to get this into a more optimal place. Now, ideally, it would be a lot easier to just take this image into Photoshop. It would probably take me less than a minute to just kind of move this thing around and get it to a point where it is where I want it. But this layout here of it being improper actually works a little bit more with showing and illustrating how to manipulate our image planes. So here, I'm going to tap spacebar and go back to my perspective viewport, where we can see, again, our reference plane. If I select it and hit W, I get the ability we have here to move things around. Okay, so there's my move tool. And the first thing I'm going to do is just move it back along the Z-axis here. Now the reason for this is that when we model the dumpster, it's going to appear at the origin. It's going to appear at the middle of a world. And if you look at where the origin is in the front, that's where the dumpster is. But if I were to start modeling it with the reference plane right through the center, my dumpster would be bisected by the reference plane. So by moving it straight back, I can ensure that from the front anyway, I still see the image plane where it should be, and my dumpster will then appear in front of it. Now, if I use the move tool to go and slide this guy along, I can then go and zoom in on this hole, and I can use my middle mouse button now to click and drag, and we'll use that hole as kind of a means of centering the dumpster. Next, I'll click and drag on the up arrow, followed by zooming in on one of the wheels and going and placing those wheels on the ground. So again, I'm doing this using my middle mouse button in order to better present the plane. And just like that, that plane is now kind of where we want it. From the front, it'll appear quite centered, and from the side, we won't see anything of that plane. It'll kind of disappear. Cool. Now with one of these planes set up, we can go and start setting up the second one. This one is a side image, so I'll switch over to my side view. I'll maximize that, and I'll go to my view, image plane, import image. And again, I'll go navigate to where I've stored my images. In this case, they're in the class files for this. And this time I'll be using the dumpster silhouette _L. Here too, I'll move this up, zoom in, and middle mouse drag this up so that the wheels land on the ground here as well. Now it doesn't really matter here, front or back, where this image is. You know, you could probably center it as much as you want, but it won't matter so much. What will matter, however, is lining this one up again off to the side. Again, just so that when we create our dumpster in the middle, it isn't completely obstructed by one of these planes. Now, with our reference planes set up and in the world, we're now ready to begin modeling. There are 4 elements here we're going to need to model on our dumpster. The first is going to be the main body of the dumpster itself, the actual main box here that is the object itself. The handles that are on the side used by the garbage truck to lift this thing up and empty it. The wheel assembly down here, as well as the lid and the hinge assembly on which the lid moves. Now ideally, when modeling complex shapes like this, the easiest way to approach doing this is to start the main body of the object first. And upon this, we'll place all of the attachments. So in this case, the dumpster is the object. The handles, the wheels, the lid are all attachments. So we should make those secondary. First, our dumpster is a box, so I'll create a box. I'll head over to my side view, and if I look at this thing from the side view, you'll notice one of the first problems we see. Now this is where I'm going to turn off my grid in order to better see. I know my image plane is in the right place. Now here's my box, and if I were to go place my box, say, over the wheel, you can see that we are going to run into another problem, and this problem is that the geometry obscures our view of the image plane. This means the more of the dumpster we make, the less of the image plane we'll see. So we need to manipulate our viewport in a way that allows us to see both the reference plane and the geometry. To do this, I'll head to the shading menu, and I'll go down to where it says X-ray, and I'll turn that on. When I do, our geometry will become semi-transparent. Now, it's not wireframe. There still is some color of the object here, but it does allow me to now see my reference plane through the object. This is a more ideal way of setting up our modeling. Now I'll go and move the box here to the front left-hand corner, and I'm just kind of lining up the front of the box along with the front of the dumpster, and the bottom of the box with the bottom of the dumpster. This is ignoring the little bumper we see in the front. From here, I'll switch to my front view. I'll turn off my grid here as well, and now I can go and manipulate the box again. I can move it over, and I can start dragging my vertices out here to change the shape of the box a little bit. Again, finding the side, like so. And now, instead of moving these edges all the way out to the other side, out here, which is a completely valid way of working, instead what we're going to do is we're going to put down here in the type in transform a value of 0 in for x. What this is going to do is it's going to center these vertices along the middle of the world. Since our dumpster is symmetrical, we need only model 1/2 of it and then duplicate it over the other side. So, using 0 as the middle point, we'll be able to make sure that our duplicates are exactly along the same point along the middle. I'll now switch back over to my side view, and I'll continue editing the vertices here to line them up with the shape of the dumpster. I'll move them up, and I'll move them back a little bit. Here, I'll bring this one up to capture the slope present in the top of the dumpster. With that done, we can start working on the lip surrounding the top of the dumpster. To do this, I'll switch to polygon mode, shift drag the entire thing to remove the side view, so I only have the top polygon selected. And we're going to use extrude now in order to create the bevel that exists along the top here, the lip that exists. So with that polygon selected, I'll enable the extrusion tool, and I'm going to go into the offset, and I'm going to just click and drag the offset out a little bit. Now it is very important that you offset in the right way. For instance, if I make this offset big enough, you can see that I do start to see that edge show up. However, what's actually going on is the bevel has gone inwards past its original position and then out the other side. This is incorrect. The offset we're actually looking for is a negative offset. So if I zero this out and instead drag the number negative, you can see what we're going to get is the beginning of that lip. So here, I'll just go and type in some values that appear to be what we're looking for. And I found that with the scale of these images, 254. Oh, that's a little too big. Let's try 125. Not quite there. A little bit further. Yeah, 145. Something in that nature. So this is going to give me a lip here that's about the right size. And bring it down just a little bit further. Okay. So there is the first extrusion. I'll hit the extrude button. This is going to enable a second extrusion. Now I'm not actually going to move this. If I do, you'll see that it moves up in the wrong direction, which is not exactly what I'm looking for. That is not the direction we want this extrusion to move. So I'll just accept the extrusion, go to move, and now I can just move this straight up, since our move tool is still world aligned, meaning our extrusion will now match the shape of the bevel around the top of the dumpster. So if I go back to my perspective view to keep an eye on what's going on, we've now made a slightly smaller version of the dumpster. There's no hole yet. We have to go and make that yet. And it has some polygons on the side here that eventually we're going to end up deleting. Let's do the hole first. For the hole, I'm going to switch over to the top view. Now the reason I want to go into the top view, and I'll turn off my grid, and for this I'm going to switch over to wireframe mode. Now the reason for this is we need to kind of take a look at what we're seeing here. So first, the outer perimeter here, this is the edge of the little lip that we just made. And the inner box that you see here are actually the walls of the dumpster itself. So this is along the back and this is the side. So what I'm about to do is create another extrusion to bring this in. I want to make sure that that extrusion at least goes further than these lines here. If I don't, the inside of the dumpster will be larger than the outside, which doesn't really make a lot of sense. So I'll enable the extrusion tool. Under the offset, I can bring it up. And now you can see it's gone past that second blue line. And what I'm getting now is that this distance here essentially is setting the thickness of the walls of the dumpster. So this is with 0.2, maybe 125. That's not big enough. Maybe we'll just leave it at 0.2. So something like that. Again, if I return to my perspective view, we can see that we've now actually created that lip along the top. So next, the only thing we need to do is create the internal shape of this. And I'm going to do this again with another extrusion. Again, I'm not going to manipulate the extrusion. I'll accept it at 0. This way I can switch to my move tool and bring it straight down, creating, again, that same offset. Now, the inside of our dumpster, and you can see this a little bit more clearly from the side, is at an angle, which is not going to work. We need it to be flush like the bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the scale tool, and holding J, I'll shift and holding J, I'll click and drag. Now what J is going to do is it's going to enable me to bring this to 0. So now that is a completely flush with the y-axis line. I'll switch over to my move tool and I'll bring this down until it too is giving me some thickness for the bottom sheet of metal making up the dumpster. So just like that, we've got a nice little box that we've made with a lip around the top. This is the beginnings of our dumpster. I'm going to now select all of the polygons on the side here, and I'm using the central axis line here of X to determine which is the middle. And I'll delete those polygons. This will allow us to now actually see that we do have a half dumpster. I'll also go and grab my vertices, switch to scale, and holding J, drag again to zero out all of those vertices. I'm also going to ensure that in X they are at 0. This too enables us to get our perspective to work. If I turn on the grid, all vertices should be along that central line so that when we make our symmetrical copy, it will duplicate this exactly along that middle point. If this is off in any way, our dumpster could end up being longer than the image. Okay, we're off to a good start. If I return to my side view, we can see that the other thing that's missing from this are the little bumpers. There are 2 in the front and 1 large one in the back. So I'll switch to edges, and I'll grab one of the edges here along the front. We don't actually have the right number of polygons to extrude, so if I select one and shift double click a neighbor, this will select around the entire dumpster. This is a ring selection. Because we deleted those polygons in the center, it's also not doing anything inside of the dumpster. The bumpers don't exist there, so we shouldn't actually model them there. Here, I'm going to go and create a connection and switch to my move tool, and I can go and move this into the right place. Now this connection is not straight, and I would like it to be straight, so if I hold J while scaling, I can straighten it out. And then I'll move it up to along the top of the front bumper and the back bumper. I can switch back over, grabbing an edge, shift double clicking the next, and I can connect here. I can grab an edge. Let's accept that. And then I'll again grab an edge and shift double click the next one and connect this as well to make the next edge. So now we have all the edges we need, and if I return to my side view, I can now just double click an edge, hit W to move, and place it in the right location. So this first edge will go along the bottom of the top bumper, and the next one will hit the top of the bottom bumper. Now I can grab the polygons that are responsible for the bumpers, and I can extrude them. Now one of the things we need to watch out for is that the back bumper, which is a singular polygon here that should be extruded, is currently made up of 3 polygons. This means that one of the edges here on both the top and one at the bottom are now wasted topology. So we'll go and clean this up first. I'll grab my vertices and head into target weld. And here I'll click on one vertex and drag it up. This will snap it and weld it to the end point. This allows me to get rid of vertices that are not contributing to the shape of my object, so that I end up with something a little bit more like this. Now it is important that we don't create n-gons while we're doing this. This is a quad, and along the side we have a quad, a 4-sided shape, a triangle, which is 3 sides, another 4-sided shape, and another 3-sided shape. So this didn't create anything above 4 sides. If I return back to my polygon mode, turn off target weld, and then go and select the polygons that make up the bumpers. In my side view, to watch the thickness, I'll go and extrude these things out until we end up with about the right thickness. Something about that. I can accept my changes and go and double check my work. So far so good. We ended up with what looks like half a dumpster. Now, when we extruded, we actually created a couple more vertices that are wasted here. They're not contributing to the shape of our mesh, so we'll go and delete those as well. I'll return to vertice mode, return to target weld, and I'll just click and drag from one over to the back, ensuring I do the same thing for the inside, like so. And then same thing here in the front. Now the extrusion of these bumpers also created more polygons along the central axis, which are not going to be helpful. So we'll just go and delete those right away. Now we are getting a little bit of funny shading on this edge here. And the reason that's happening is that this object is trying to smooth out between those two. So we have a hard edge here and a soft edge here. And so you can see what that's doing. Let me turn off the grid. You can see what that's doing is it's kind of blending these in here. So we can always go and grab that edge. And then under our tools up at the top, we can go and manipulate that edge. So if we head into the, let's see, where are you now? Under the mesh category here, we can go and, is it crease? No, we want hard edge. Unlock this normal mesh tool, and we are going to, under mesh display, go into harden edges, options, and apply. And now that will crease that edge so that we actually do get a corner there. This will get rid of the funky shading, that black value that we are getting along the bottom that we didn't actually need. Okay. With that gone, we are now in a point where this thing is pretty much good to go. So this is the main body of the dumpster. I'm not going to bother with deleting our history or naming the object yet because this isn't yet a dumpster. This is half of the body of the dumpster. So we'll keep that until we're done. The next thing we're going to tackle is going to be the handle here. Now the handle is a box shape with a little bit of a rounded corner and some triangular shapes above the top and bottom. Now this is where we need the image, because in the image we can very clearly see that what makes those triangular shapes are 3 fins along the top and those same 3 fins along the bottom. And those fins are fairly thin, about the thickness of the metal that goes around here as well. The reason that's important is that we don't get any of that information from the side image, and we don't get any of that information from the side here, nor do we get any of that information from the front. So this additional image that I just Googled is going to provide us with the missing information. To create this, I'm going to start with a new object. This is going to be a new box. We'll go and position it into about the right location. Now we can see here in the front view, we are again getting an obscure, our geometry is obscuring our reference plane. So I'll head into shading, X-ray, so that I can see through it from the front. Now I'll get this thing about close enough to where I want it. And in order to get it exactly where I want it, I can switch back over to our dumpster and grab a vertex. And here in X, I'll find out that X is set to 3. So if I go to this object and grab the vertices along its left side, I can set them to 3. And now they are actually flush with the dumpster. These ones I'll bring in, and the top ones can come down, and the bottom ones can come up. And I now have something that approximates the shape of this object a little bit clearer. Next, I'll go and select the edges that make up the corners, top and bottom, that are supposed to be rounded. And in my front view, I'll go and bevel those in order to broaden them out a little bit and create that shape. So again, here I'll use 0.125 for my bevel, and that gives us something pretty similar to the shape that we're seeing here. Now, in order to make the hole in the middle, I can grab the polygons, both front and back, and we can go and give them a little bit of offset. Now you can see here, because of the scale of this offset, even a value of 0.1 is just completely destroying this. And part of the reason for that is that the extrusion that I made, or the scaling that I did on this object, made it so small that even a value of 0.1 is way too big. So here I've got 0.12, which is not doing it, 0.25. That's actually quite a bit better. That looks a little bit closer to the shape. So if I go to my perspective mode here, we can actually see what's going on here as well, which is we still have that polygon there, but we now have the thickness. And since we need to make a hole, I'll delete those polygons. I'm also now going to seal up the interior of this thing. Again, since polygons only have a singular side, if we were to look inside this thing in a game engine, it would actually completely disappear on us. So I'll double click one edge, shift double click the other edge, and I'll use the bridge option to bridge those edges together and actually create polygons between those two new holes. We now have a loop of polygons here making up the right shape. Now you can also see that our handle here is not the right length, so we should go and correct that as well. This edge here at the front, if I switch back to W in Z, gives me the right location that I need for my handle's front. So if I grab this and grab the vertices that make up the front, I can go and paste that value in. It doesn't want to be pasted. There we go. Sometimes it acts a little bit funny here. I'm not sure why that is the case, but typing in the value and hitting enter sometimes doesn't seem to take, and the value automatically resets itself. But there it is now. Here I'll take this one and that vertex, negative 1.38. So I can go back to our handle, select the vertices from this one, and here I'll type it in, negative 1.38. And when I hit enter, that now snaps it to the back. So now our handle is actually the right length. The next thing I'm going to do is now start to create those triangular fins. Now, since we don't have any polygons along the top or the bottom to extrude out for the fins, we'll need to create those polygons. To do that, I'll grab one edge and shift double click one of the other ones to get a ring selection around our handle. With connect, I can now go and insert a new edge. I'm going to create one edge for each of the fins. So this is going to be the one in the center. And over here under our connect options, if I type in 3 and enter, you can see that we now have 3 edges. A quick look at our reference sees that the center fin is in the middle. The front fin is actually quite a bit at the front, and the rear fin is also quite a bit at the rear. So we need to split these things up. This is what's called pinch. If I set this to a value of 0.7 and hit enter, they will split up. If this value gets smaller, they'll get closer together. And in fact, if it gets negative, they'll start going down closer together. So here I'm using control with my middle mouse button in order to manipulate them. So the idea is that if they hit 1, they'll actually go all the way to the front and all the way to the back. So I don't want a value of 0.1, but a fairly close to 0.1 value will get them fairly separated. So I'll do 0.9, and that looks pretty decent like that. And if I switch to my selection tool, that'll accept the changes and give me now these new edges. Now, these edges are not going to be extrudable to create our triangular fins, so I will bevel them to give them some thickness. Here, I'll enter a value that will give me a value that looks correct. Until, again, I get them about the right thickness here. So let me try 0.15. Yeah, that looks pretty decent. So with that done, I'll go back to my selection tool. This will accept the changes. Now we can go and create the fins. So if I select the 3 polygons from the top that are meant to be fins, and the 3 polygons from the bottom that are meant to be fins, I can extrude them. Now before I extrude, I'm going to do this from the front view so that I can see how much they need to be extruded. So I'll just use the move tool here to drag them out, and now I can accept those changes. Now what we've created is not triangular fins, but square fins. So we now need to get rid of one of these edges. The easiest way I've found to do this is to select and then remove select from the corner. So here I'm holding shift and I'm dragging over the corner. And then with shift I'm removing the side and removing the bottom. What this does is it leaves me with a selection of just the edges we don't want. And if I hold control and hit backspace, that'll remove them, leaving behind just the triangular fins. That is the completion of the modeling for the handling. Now all we need to do is clean it up so that it's not expensive on the engine and doesn't contain any wasted geometry. The first area of wasted geometry that's visible is in the edges that make up the fins that run in between the fins. Here I'm selecting 6 edges along the side that don't actually need to be there. This can be reduced to a triangle, and indeed if I go to Edit Mesh and Collapse, those will collapse and leave me with a singular edge. Now while this edge is technically not manipulating the shape, I'm actually far more fond of leaving that there than instead of having a very long, ugly triangle on this. And so here I'll allow the mesh to contain a couple of extra vertices, even if they're not manipulating the shape, only because I prefer that to long triangles. Now this does actually contain some more wasted geometry, and in order to see it, we're going to have to move the handle. So, if I head over to the channel box, I can see where the handle lives, and in fact I'll just copy that number. Then I can move the handle out. And the reason I want to move it out is that all along the back of the handle are polygons that are not contributing to the shape and are never seen. These polygons live against the dumpster. They are actually flush with the side of the dumpster, which means from no angle will we ever be able to see them. And if you can never see them, they are never needed. So I'll just select them all and hit delete. This will create a big giant hole inside of the handle, but again, that handle is going to be flush on the dumpster. So if I go back into object mode, back into the channel box, and I paste my value back in, the handle snaps right back to where it was, flush against the dumpster, and we don't see that any of those polygons have been removed. Now it is important to note that this is floating geometry. There aren't any edges or vertices on the side of the dumpster that support this shape having grown out from it. But the shape doesn't grow out. It's actually its own mesh, a separate piece of geometry. When saved together, they will essentially read as one in a game engine. But right now, this allows us to get the same shape with fewer edges and vertices, making it cost a lot less. This is what's known as floating geo. So there we go. We have 2 elements modeled now, the dumpster body and the singular handle. Again, we will duplicate these over to the other side once we've completed an entire half. The next thing we're going to try to accomplish is the wheel. Now again, the front wheel assembly and the rear wheel assembly are symmetrical, meaning we only really need to deal with one. This is going to make our lives a lot easier. The wheel assembly is made up of several components: the wheel itself, the axle upon which it rotates, the fork that holds the axle in place, a cylinder that holds the fork, and then a box upon which the cylinder is connected. This allows this thing to turn side to side so that the dumpster can be steered if it were being pushed. And the wheel allows it to rotate, allowing the dumpster to move. So we're going to have to make each of those separate components and attach them all together. I find it easier to start with the wheel itself. Now it's worth noting that there are 3 spokes and 3 gaps between those spokes in the wheel. This means that whatever we make for the cylinder that will make the wheel needs to have a multiple of 3 edges along its sides. If I go and look at how large a spoke is in relation to how big the gap is between the spokes, you can see here that it's about half the size. There appears to be twice the length here to this one length here. So that gives us a ratio of 1, 2, 3 components for each of these 3 things. So I'm going to need to make a cylinder not only with a multiple of 3 sides, but a multiple of 9 sides, since that is 3 equal segments here. And in fact, a single segment for this spoke I don't think is going to look so good, so I'm going to double it, which gives us 18. So I'll create a cylinder. We'll move that cylinder into the right location. We're going to rotate that cylinder like so. I'll try and get it as close to in position as I can, and then I'll just scale it down to match the size of the wheel. Something about like that. I'll head over to my attribute editor under the Polycylinder 1 tab, where we can go and manipulate the number of subdivisions along its axis to 18. So just like that, we're pretty good. Now we're also going to need a couple of subdivisions along its cap here in order to make the edges that make up the spokes. Now we could just go add those in later with an extrusion, but why not do them here if I can do them by simply entering a number? Here I've entered 3, and this creates 3 equal polygons along the cap. This gives us almost the perfect cutout for these holes already built. Before I do anything else, we've only been looking at this from a single viewport, and if we go and look at it from the front, we'll see that it's got some issues. It's actually quite a bit wider than the wheel should be, and was still centered in the middle of the world. So I'm going to go set it up here and scale it until it's about the right size for that wheel. Here from the front, we can actually clearly see the fork that holds the wheel in place, the cylinder holding the fork in place, and the box holding the cylinder in place. Okay, now that that's done from the side, we can go in and we can start manipulating this thing. So first, I'll go to polygon mode, and I'll go and make one of the holes between the spokes. So here I'm just using the marquee selection tool, selecting the polygons that don't need to be there, and deleting them. Since I'm doing this from the side, it's actually doing both sides of the wheel at once. This has got the added effect of me being able to do 2 things at the same time. Next, we need to close this up, and we'll use our bridge tool here again. So I'll double click one edge and shift double click the other, and when I go and hit bridge, it'll connect. Now the default bridge settings we can see are off here. And what's happening essentially is the central edge here on the right of the outside of the wheel is actually connecting to the central left side. So they're offset, they're corkscrewing as they go. And we can actually go and alter that by changing the bridge offset. And if I just go and scale that back a little bit, here I'm at a value of 2, we can see that they're now going through quite nice and straight. I'll grab my selection tool and then do the next hole. Here too, hitting bridge. Here too, playing with the offset until I get it nice and straight. Using the selection tool, I'll accept my changes. And then finally the last one. This one actually doesn't require any offset, so we're good. So that created somewhat the spokes and the holes in between them. Now this looks pretty boring in terms of its actual shape, and I want to make it look a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to grab the central vertice here on either side of the spoke, and then holding control, I'll grab the polygons, and then I'll go to scale, and I'm going to bring them in a little bit. This then gives them a little bit more of a cleaner shape, giving us a really nice angle here on the wheels. The other thing I'm going to do is that this looks really low poly. These edges here, that's a 90-degree corner, and even in the front view of the image here, while it is fairly low res, we can see that there is an angle here. So I'm going to go and bevel these edges in order to just try and achieve that same effect, giving us a little bit rounder of a wheel. Cool, that looks pretty decent. The next thing I'll do is build the axle out of this. So I'll grab the vertices in the middle, control, and I'll select polygons to convert my selection. And then I'm going to inset this using the offset here on the extrude tool. Now it is very important before you accept this And if you notice when I place my cursor here over one of the outer polygons, you can see that something is actually quite wrong here. Well, this did look like it was a very simple offset. It's actually not. See, what's happened is the offset was so large that it went past the center point and out the other side, creating this kind of rudimentary problem we're having here. So if I go and scale down the size here on our scale to maybe 0.01, you can see now that when I go and select these outer polygons, or just hover my mouse above them, they're not actually going through center anymore. They are just a singular thing, a singular polygon here. So this means that our inset now is just this tiny little amount instead of having gone all the way through. So I'm just going to set the number now to 0.02. This is, again, if I double check this, it's a single quad here on the outside. And what that's going to do when I accept this is it's going to then give me a very tiny inset. Next we'll go to extrude, and maybe it's better to do this one from the front. And what I'll do is I'll just use the move tool here to pull this out until we hit the edge of our extrusion length. And now we have the axle upon which the wheel rotates. Now we need to build the forks that hold this thing together. So essentially, there's a metal bracket that goes around the wheel with a piece of metal going around each of these little cylinders that was just created. Now what I want to do here is I want to make sure that when I create this thing, it's really accurate in going around this shape. However, I have no idea what dimensions this is. I could probably figure it out from the dimensions I used to create the cylinder and then calculating my insets all the way down until I get to this one. But there's actually a little bit of an easier way of accomplishing this. First, I'm going to grab an edge and double click its neighbor to go all the way around the cylinder. After that, I'm going to connect. Now I need to reset my connection tool here since it is still using the previous connection settings. I'll head over to the front where I can see where the forks are. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the slide here to pull these things out a little bit until they line up a little bit better with the forks. With that done, I'll bevel my new edges. Until I get something that is about the right thickness here. So maybe something about that size. That looks pretty close to the right thickness here. Now this technically is a lot of wasted geometry on the cylinder, stuff we're not going to need, and in fact, stuff we're not going to use. However, it is worth cleaning it up now as we go. So first things first, let's create the fork. I'll do this by clicking an edge, or clicking a face rather, and then shift double clicking its neighbor to edge loop that. I'll then shift click one of the ones over here and shift double click its neighbor to loop it around. Now before I do anything, I'm going to head up to Mesh, Edit Mesh, and we are going to duplicate what I have selected. Now when I do that, I now have two meshes selected. Actually, three meshes selected. First, let's select the actual wheel here again and go back to edges, and I'm going to remove the edges I don't need. I'm doing this by clicking, double clicking an edge, and control backspace to remove that edge. Now they don't seem to be removing here, so I'm going to double check and see what's going on. And I think it's that I have too many objects selected, which I did. So I want to ensure here that what I'm looking at is just this guy. So there we go. So double clicking an edge and control backspace will remove that edge, and more importantly, it removes the vertices along with it. So if I go to vertex mode, you can see there are no vertices left behind on this cylinder. Now, the funny little rendering that we're seeing here that's off is the fact that these two things are still here. These are what was duplicated when we selected those polygons and hit duplicate. Now, they are two meshes, so the first thing I'm going to do is combine them into one. And what we have now is a ring of polygons that perfectly goes around our axle. I'm going to go to my polygon mode and make sure I have everything selected. And I'm going to go to extrude and give these things a little bit of thickness. Now again, I want to be careful how much thickness I give this, and if need be, I can go into my wireframe here to make sure that it is just going out a little bit and not going all the way through the object. So that's decent like that. That's now giving me a little bit of a metal band here around these things. I might make it a little bit thicker. This is meant to hold up the entire weight of the dumpster. So I'm going to do something like that, and then I'm going to accept my changes, and I'll deselect all my polygons. So this is the metal band that holds those axles in place. The next thing we need to do is make this thing go out on an angle here, like the image, towards the back and then straight up. Now, instead of doing that with all of the polygons, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 of these things. Maybe not that one. And I'll add this one. I want about 6 of these things here. And what this is going to do is it's going to give me a much smaller extrusion this time around. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Like so. So I'll kind of show you here what I'm going to do with this. I'm going to extrude these. And I won't move them, but I'll hit OK. And then I'll go to move. And again, it'll be easier to see this from the side view. And you can see that the actual bracket here goes off to the left. And so if I just drag these off to the left, I can scale them out like that. And we now have this kind of bracket effect here. I'm going to go to scale, and I'll scale them down in Z. I'll go to move, I'll extrude, and again, I won't move them, followed by moving them. If I switch over to my front view, we'll see here that I'm a little bit off in where these things go. So I'll just grab all of the vertices and bring them down. Head back into polygons. And again, I'll select and deselect. I'll do this from the front here again. And I'll extrude, and I'll just pull them up. Like so. Lastly, I'll select and deselect, select and deselect, and delete, followed by switching to edges, and we'll bridge the two holes that generated. So there is now the bracket going around the wheel. Now again, the modeling is complete, but the cleanup is not. There is a tremendous amount of wasted topology here on this mesh, and we need to clean that up. So I'll start off by going to my vertex mode and going into target weld. Here, I'll go in and I'll start removing edges that I don't need. And I'm going to start with the angle here as it goes above, and I'll show you why. So I'll bring 2 of these things back, and I'll bring 3, only because, again, there's an odd number here, 3 to the front. Now, I'm not going to bother going all the way around the top of this thing. I'll actually just go to the back and do 2 at the back and do 3 at the front. Now, when I do that and switch to edge mode, turning off the target weld, I can now double-click and then shift double-click each of the other edges so that when I control backspace, they all go away. This is a little bit faster than target welding absolutely everything. Now, if I target weld here, I can bring an edge up and an edge over, giving me, again, a nice little clean corner here. I'm at the wrong angle to do this one. There we go. That works out quite nicely there. Now you can see the outside is quite a bit cleaner. And I'll switch over to the inside here, and I'll do the same thing. So I'll bring 2 to the back. If I can see the back, there we go. 2 back and 3 forward. Switch over to the other side, and we'll go 2 back and 3 forward. Again, I'll turn off the target weld. I'll switch over to my edges, double click, and then shift double click each of the subsequent ones, followed by control and backspace to remove them and each of their vertices. So that cleaned it up quite a bit. Now there's still actually a bit more here we don't need in the form of this edge. I'll try and see if I can see it on the inside here. There it is there. That edge. And this one. And this one. So these edges, if I remove them, are also not needed. They're there to hold that shape of that circle together, but they're not actually doing much outside of that. So that's a little bit cleaner. And I'm now pleased with that shape. Moving on, we need a cylinder upon which the little fork that we built will rotate. So that's this cylinder here. So we'll create a new cylinder. We'll move that cylinder over to the right location. We'll scale it way down. Make sure we don't go too far. Part of the problem here with scaling in Maya is that if you scale it past 0, it'll scale out on the other side, which is no good. So I'm going to go and position this thing here inside of the reference. Just something a little bit like that. I'll grab the vertices along the top and drop them down as well so they just line up with where the box is. Now this is again, pretty large object. It's 20-sided. Again, Maya's default per cylinder. And I can actually probably even drop this down to 8. As that'll probably give me, you can see that undid the modeling that I had done. That'll probably give me something a lot lower poly. Now if I grab everything and shift, drag through the center, that'll just select the tops and bottom of these things that I can then delete. And now there's no wasted topology on this object. Next, I should probably ensure that it's in the right place from the side. It can often be easy to forget to look at where you're looking at things and remember that you need to move them in more than a singular direction. Okay, with that done, we have but a single component of the wheel left to do, which is the box. Since it's a box, I'll start with a cube. I'll move the cube into the right direction, in the right position. I'll scale it down until it's about the right size. I'll head over to my vertex mode, and then I'll just go and reposition some of these vertices to line up the right way. And while I'm here, I'll delete the top polygon, since it actually won't have any use whatsoever. And then I'll just bring these forward and back, again to match the shape of what I'm seeing. I'll head over to the front view, where I need to move my brand new box into the right place. Somewhere hereabouts. I'll then go into vertex mode, and I'll start manipulating my vertices. Again, just trying to capture the angled shape that we see here in this box. And just like that, we now have a completed wheel assembly, which I'll select in its entirety and combine in order to make a singular mesh. I can go into the mesh display, go into soften and harden edges, and turn that on. And that actually didn't do any good. So we're going to go to mesh display, soften harden edges. And maybe what we'll do is bring the angle up here a little bit. I'm going to bring it up to 45 and hit apply. Now what this angle is doing is it's looking at the angle difference. If I look at 2 polygons here, between 2 polygons, and it's smoothing in between them, or smoothing the normals in between them. So here, like this will give me something that looks quite round without being quite round. And I can probably even do this for just a smaller subsect like this. Anyway, that is the wheel assembly. Now if I head back to my side view, I can Control D to duplicate this mesh and drag it over to the back to make the rear wheel. And we now have the dumpster handle, and the front and rear wheel of this side, leaving us with a singular mesh left to do. The last mesh is the lid. Now, if we take a look at what we can see of the lid from the silhouette images, we can see that it is this angled box that appears to have 2 steps on it. And from the front, we can see that it also has 3 collections of those steps from the front. I can also see, based off this corner, that there's some kind of a bracket holding an axle to the frame. This makes sense too, since that's how the object is going to move. Now, it's not impossible to model an object on an angle like this. However, it is also quite a bit easier to model something fairly straight. And since this lid is built upon a hinge that would allow it to rotate, what I'm going to do is I'm going to model it nice and straight and in a slightly open position. And then once my model is built, I'll then rotate it back down into the correct position once again. So, since this object looks like a box, I'll start by creating a new box. I'll take that box and move it up into the right location, somewhere about here. And I'll begin manipulating it by scaling it down and scaling it out. And then I'll head into vertice mode and just continue to shape it a little bit more. Now I'm going to need to bring it up to the point that it actually is connecting in the right area. And it looks like it's a little thick top to bottom here, so I'll bring it down just a little bit further. Okay, next, again, we can see that there are 2 steps here. So that's going to require an edge and another edge. That's 2, a third, and a fourth. So in edge mode, I can select all the edges that go front to back, and I'll head over to connection. I'll add 4 for my connection type, and then I'll go into move to accept my changes. I'll go back to vertices, and now I can go and move these things around a little bit. So this one will represent that edge. The next one will represent that change in angle. This one will represent that change in angle. And I appear to have not made enough. So I'm going to go and make another connection here. Just one. And again, in vertice mode, I'll move this guy up. So there we have it. I've now got all these edges required to make the bevel from the side. If we go take a look at it from the front, we can see again that there are 3 of these things. Also, we can see that our box was not set up from the side or from the front. So we'll go move it. I'll move it over to the right, leaving the little gap here. This little gap is a gap between the axle, each lid, and the dumpster. So that determines where the side of the lid's going to go. These ones will move out to the right side where, again, I can see where the lid ends here. This is all bracket, and this is the axle. And now I can see how many edges I'm going to need this way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So if I head over to edges, select everything across the front, and go to connect, I can add 6 edges this way. And I'm just going to set my slide back and set my pinch back. Now it occurred to me just now while doing this that I might actually have had the right number of edges from the front, and that this connection tool might have actually created the incorrect level of those. So we're going to have to go and double check that. I'll head over to my vertices now, and we're going to start moving things. So those are in the right position. And that's in the right position. And this is in the right position. And that one. And then finally this one. Now, let's go double check to see if we made any kind of a mistake here when looking at this thing from the side when I created these edges here. So the easy way to check for this is if I just select the vertices from the front, I should have 2 vertices here. And indeed, if I go to the selection, I can see that 2 vertices are selected. So that's correct. There should be 2 here, and there are. 2 here, and there are. 2 here, 2 here, and 2 here. And just like that, we can see that there aren't 2 here. There actually is a really thin edge. So the connection that we did the first time actually was the right amount. It just remembered our previous setting using connection and created an edge we no longer need. So what I'll do, again, hold Control and hit backspace to remove it. And now we shouldn't have any extra mess. Now we have 2 options here that we can do to start creating the shape of the lid. The first is to clean up as we go, and the second is to just completely model it and then clean it up. I prefer the latter. I prefer to finish the modeling and then do the cleanup, only because as you continue to model, you might be making more of a mess, more wasted geometry. So I find it better to actually go in and continue modeling until things are done. So let's do that. Here I'll grab the 3 polygons that make up each of the bevels. So that's going to be 3 times 3. And I'll have to do this from the side in order to see the shape. I'll hit extrude, and I'll go and move my extrusion up. And I'm looking at this thickness here, so that matches. Next, I'm going to go back to selection, and I'll deselect the 3 front and 3 back, and I'll extrude again, slightly less amount. So that gives us the steps that we needed. They're not exactly correct, so I'll go to vertice mode, and I'm just going to move the back ones forward a little bit in order to give them the angle that's there. And the same thing with the front ones. I can go and pull these back a little bit in order to give it a better angle there too. Back in perspective mode, we can see what kind of a mess this is made of things, and it has made a mess. There are a lot of wasted polygons and edges and vertices here that we'll need to clean up. So while in vertex mode, I'll go to target weld, and I can go and target weld. Now you notice I had a lot of vertices selected when I did that, and it moved them all to that point. So I need to ensure that I have nothing selected as I go in and start dragging things from the back to the front. So that cleaned up that corner a little bit, and this one here, and this one here, and this one forward as well. That's not so bad. I'll kind of just work my way along the front here. Removing vertices. Now, what I'm looking for when I'm cleaning up vertices like this is a vertex that is not contributing to the shape of the model. So this vertex here, I can move it, it doesn't matter where, and the shape of my mesh hasn't changed. So that's a really good indication of a vertice that has no bearing or no place being there on your model. And so that's what I'm doing, is just removing the ones that are not contributing to the shape. Now I know what you might be saying. Okay, hold on. There are some vertices here in the front that are not contributing to the shape, just like the ones on the side were not. And this is true. There are a bunch of these ones here that are not helping. We'll come and revisit those in a moment. The reason for that is I'm going to clean them up in a slightly different way. So here I'm going to go and drag these guys off, like so. And that'll clean up that one. We'll work our way along here. Until we get to the last corner, like this. Now this is often tedious work, and I know it's not very fun, but it is required. It can make the difference between a game that runs at 90 frames a second and a game that runs at 60 frames a second. Having geometry that is not an additional expense on the engine for no reason is really rather important. Making sure that everything that you've done, everything that you have that contributes to the shape of your model is contributing to the shape of the model, and that there aren't extra vertices and edges for no reason. So here in the front, I can see These ones that we spoke about, and then the same ones are here at the back. Now, the reason I didn't use the target weld on those is that there's a little bit of a faster way to do this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go with edge mode and select the 4 edges at the front and the 4 edges at the back, like that. And then here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to edit mesh and collapse, and those things will all become triangles for me, cleaning them up quite a bit faster than if I were to try and go and manually move them around. Now again, this edge here technically is not doing anything to the shape of my model. You can see if I move it, the model itself doesn't change. However, again, I would rather have that there than having these really long skinny triangles over to the side. And so that's why I'm going to leave that there. Now on the bottom, we do have a problem here. This problem has to do with the topology here existing from having created these bevels on the top. And so I'm going to remove them. Now technically, in a realistic environment here, the underside of this thing would just be a negative version of the top side, which is really what these things would look like. However, to save a little bit of topology and a little bit of polygons here in our shape, I'm actually not going to do that. I'm just going to make it a flat plane that I'll delete. What I can do now is I can go and grab the 3 edges from the front, 1, 2, and 3, the 3 corresponding edges from the back, and if I go and bridge those, they'll close up the shape really nice and clean, leaving me with just 3 quads here underneath. So again, it's not as realistic as it could be in terms of the shape of that lid, but it's going to be a lot cheaper. And again, in a situation where this lid is probably mostly going to be in the downward position, that is a much cheaper way of doing that. We could always put a normal map or something under here to capture that shape. Okay, so we're now most of the way there. The last thing we've got to do, we'll look at this from the side, is going to be just creating the axle upon which the lid rotates, and the little bracket upon which the axle is connected to the dumpster. So just like when we made the wheel, it was easier to create the wheel itself first, and then create the axle from it. I'm going to do the same thing here. Let me hold J here while I rotate in order to snap this thing, like so. And then I'm going to go and move it. There we go. Up and into the right position. Again, I'll try and get this close enough here. We're going to go into its construction. Again, at 20 is way too big for this. I'll bring this down to about 12. That looks like it's going to fit a lot more. And then we'll scale it down to also kind of match the shape of the axle, which I can't really see from that angle. So we'll switch over to the front. And here it's a little bit easier to see where this thing belongs and how to scale it down. We can go back into the modeling tools, go back to vertice mode, and I know these guys are going to come out, and these guys are going to go to 0 in X. Now the other thing that I should probably do while I'm here is to delete the polygons along center. So again, this is only half the axle. Everything else that we've made, the dumpster has a hole along the halfway point, and the lid doesn't actually meet the halfway point. But this axle here, this actually will be along the halfway, and so it is important that it does reach out there. So we'll grab the vertices here on the right side, and again I'll head over to the front view, and I'll move these over to the right until we get all the way past that guy, and then we need to make this flange here on the end. So I'll go to polygon modes, and I'll select and shift select to grab just the cap. We'll extrude this, and I'm going to go and drag it out, and then scale it up, and I'll extrude again and drag it out, and just like that we've got our flange. I'll go and select the ring of edges here, and I'll add a connection. Again, I want to make sure that I'm using the not the previous settings connections, but just something like this. And we'll go and move that new edge over here, Okay, now I could either place this in the center and bevel it like we did before. Another option we have is actually just to go and create another connection, like so. This will work just as well. I'll grab the polygons all the way around, and again, we'll go to mesh, and we'll duplicate these into a new shape. I'll go to object mode. I'll select our axle and control backspace to remove the edges that were made in order to help create this shape. So now I can grab this thing's polygons and extrude them. And I'll just grab the thickness to something like so. Let's try 0.254. Not too bad. There we go. I'm just playing around with the numbers here to get something that looks a little bit closer to the silhouette. Okay, so now we have this thing surrounding the axle. It's not actually connected to the dumpster here in any way. So what I'll do is deselect half of this object. This is the top half, so I just have the bottom half selected. And I'll extrude that, again, without moving it. And then I'll go to move, and I'll move it straight down. I'm going to make sure that it goes all the way inside the dumpster, and in fact, we're going to go to R for the scale tool, and while holding J, I'll scale these things down to make them flat. So now, with this thing inside of the dumpster, like it is, again, we've got wasted topology, which is worth cleaning, and so I'll go into vertex mode. I'll go back out here. This is going to be a little bit easier to do in wireframe. Something like so, and I'll go into my target weld, and I can just start bringing these guys to one side or the other. And we'll go to the back here. Let's see, this way, and I'll bring these ones forward as well. And that kind of cleaned up the bottom a little bit. I'll get out of my wireframe view here, and we'll go and get out of target weld mode. And I'll remove those edges. And we've now got something quite a bit cleaner. It is got a lot of topology here underneath and inside the dumpster. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move this up until it's just barely inside this object. And I'll bring that one up as well. And now you can see it actually matches the angle quite a bit cleaner. And we now have an axle, or a bracket. Now with that, the majority of the modeling is actually kind of completed. Now what we need to do here is we're going to actually need to rotate the lid into the right place. You can see that this guy's pivot is in the right place, that I can actually rotate that and move it the right way, which is fantastic. However, if I were to select two objects and combine them, the pivot point snaps to the center point of those two things, which is not what we're going to want. So we're going to have to go and move our pivot here. So we're in the tool palette here. I'm going to hit the Edit Pivot button, and I'll go move it back like so. I'll hold X to enter snap mode. That didn't like where it was going. I think snap to grid is what's turned on. And so we'll just get rid of snaps altogether here. And I'll get this just kind of close enough here, so that's going to be okay that way. And I can move it forward a little bit here too as well. There we go. Now it doesn't really matter much from the front where that pivot goes, because it'll rotate all the same. And so I'm just going to leave it there for now. We'll turn off the Edit Pivot mark, and you can see now we can actually rotate the lid to close the lid up and down. So what I'll do is I'll enter the side mode here, and we'll just close the lid. So I'll bring it down to here. You can see that we did get the lid a little bit shorter, and it's a little bit taller in some of these sections. But it does kind of match close enough. I could go and manipulate those, so I'm not too concerned about that. Next, what I'm going to do is, just while I'm in object mode here, I can go and first delete our planes. We're done with them. And I'll select everything and go to combine so that I have this entire thing now as a singular object. What I'm going to do now is edit the pivot. And I would like to move the pivot to the origin. So I'm going to turn the grid on so I can see where the origin is. And I'll hold X to enter snap mode, and I'll snap it to the origin. Turn off edit pivot mode. And now, with my pivot at the center, we're now prepared to go and duplicate the other half. So the way we're going to duplicate this is I'm going to head over to the modify, the edit, edit. And what I'm looking for is this guy here, duplicate special. Now what that's going to allow us to do when we duplicate special is, let me show you the settings here. It did it on its own already. By default here, you're going to get a means of altering the transformation of your object. So we can move it, and we can rotate it, or we can scale it. And you can see scale set to 0 to 1. This is a normalized number. So if I set this to -1 in X, which is this first value here, when I hit my duplicate, it's going to switch X to -X, which will put it on the other side. So when I hit apply with something selected, it'll then go and make the duplicate side of that object. So that just created the other half of our dumpster, which if we select both of them and combine, it'll actually combine them into one solid dumpster. Now it is worth noting here that there is a problem with what we've done in that it didn't actually give us two proper dumpsters. You'll see that if I go into polygon mode here, and I double click on a polygon on the dumpster body, that it doesn't actually select the entirety of the dumpster body. It only selects one side as a separate object. And the reason for that is that it didn't weld along that center line. So I'm going to select every single vertice on my mesh. And I'm going to head over to Edit Mesh and Merge. And I'm going to go into the settings here, and this number is going to determine how close vertices are before they merge together into a single vertice. So 0.001, that's a pretty small number. And I'm going to hit apply. Now, before I hit apply, we want to watch this number here. It's 2052. When I hit apply, that number should drop from 2052. Here it went down by 30, so 2020. That's kind of good. That means that some vertices have been welded together. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click the edge along the middle and control backspace to remove it, since the center edge is not contributing to the shape of our model. I can do the same thing with the axle, another shape that shares its central edge. And just like that, we should actually now have a completed modeled dumpster. So, the last few things we need to do here in order to clean this thing up: head over to the attribute editor and select your dumpster, the channel box, and we're going to go and first edit, delete by type in history, clean it up that way, and then we'll go give it a name, dumpster. And just like that, this object is now done. We can go hit File, Save Scene As, and save it as dumpster. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed this, and stay tuned for the next episode. Take care.